So before we start, I'm just kind of curious as to everybody's level of experience with hybrid frameworks in general. Anybody developed with Ionic or PhoneGap or Cordova, Titanium, React Native, any of the above? Looks like most people have, which is great. Makes my job a little easier today. So we're going to be talking mostly about Ionic, but also hybrid apps in general. And before I dive in, I'm going to talk about Ionic, but really give you a big picture about Cordova, hybrid apps, and where the ecosystem is as a whole right now. So first of all, before I get started, my name is Nick Fogel. I used to be an attorney and went from writing legal code to computer code because it is a hell of a lot more fun. Right now, I'm a full-stack engineer, and I'm also the CTO of a local tech startup called Wave. My co-founder is in the room as well, Barrett Hall there. And the really cool thing about Wave, and as it applies to this presentation, is Wave is built entirely on Ionic. So I've learned a lot about Ionic since we started developing it last May. So with no further ado, let's dive right in. As many of you may already know, and those listening on the web may or may not, the big thing about a hybrid app is it lets a front-end developer jump right in with little or no back-end experience or specialized knowledge of something like Objective-C for iOS development or Java if you're building for Android. So you've got an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript web view. You've also got this whole other layer, and this is where Cordova comes in. Cordova is an open source project. It's from Apache. Most of you probably know Apache from web servers, right? The Apache web server was a real game changer. And what they've done with the open source Cordova native plugins is also a game changer for mobile app development. What Cordova does is it exposes that native functionality, whether that is a thumbprint sensor, whether it's a microphone, geolocation, any number of native APIs are exposed to that Cordova plugin, and it actually interfaces with your web-based functions as well. So that's just kind of a brief overview. Now, why would anybody choose hybrid? The biggest thing is money. I mean, that when I'm thinking about development, it's dollar signs. You've got specialized developers who are charging over $150 an hour. You can quickly rack up fees for that. You've got Accelerator, and Titanium isn't even on here, but you got like Sencha Touch, PhoneGap, Ionic, React Native is a big one right now, and then the Cordova bot here as well. That's not really a framework, that's the overall wrapper that's going to allow you to expose that native functionality. So PhoneGap has been around for a long time. That's kind of the first crack at using this UI web view in order to deploy a web-based app into a mobile native app. What Ionic does is it kind of picks up where PhoneGap leaves off, and it has a very opinionated way of doing things. It uses Angular. We'll get into more depth with Ionic as a framework, but it kind of picks up where PhoneGap left off, does a lot of things better. People still use PhoneGap, but over the last few years, things have been trending in the opposite direction, away from PhoneGap, more to Ionic. And recently, there's been a lot of buzz around React Native, so we'll dive into that real quick too. So right now, if you're looking at hybrid frameworks, you're going to read a ton about why you should pick Ionic or why you should pick React Native. The biggest benefit about React Native, and it's honestly something that Ionic cannot do yet, it actually compiles to totally native code. Whereas Ionic is really relying on this web view, and then Cordova to kind of shoehorn that into native API, exposing those native APIs. So that's the biggest difference in terms of the technology and what's going on. The bigger issue though right now is React Native is still really new, Android version, which just released last fall, the documentation is really, really fragmented. It's not to say that it's not out there, you're just going to have to look a lot harder. There are a lot of examples out there using ES5, a lot using ES6, and no real clear adoption rate, and it's less opinionated too. And I think that's what this comes down to. Whereas with Ionic, it's been around for a few years now, massive, helpful community. It's also more than a framework, and I think this is something worth considering, especially if you're prototyping something and looking at backend services and wanting to integrate those. The documentation is best in class. I mean, it really is. If you've ever spent any time out there on the web looking at Ionic's documentation, it really is unbeatable. It's really well designed, well organized, well laid out, and there are actual code samples so that you can actually see an embedded view and code on the left-hand side, and that's going to actually correspond to what you're seeing as you scroll down and look at these different UI elements. They've also got a really promising future. Just this week, big news for Ionic, they closed the Series A at around $8 million. So it's a very promising future that they've got. And I love that. I'm sure people see this. I've seen this before. It's one of my favorite comics or memes about software development. It's kind of alluding to this situation that all of us have been in before. We're working at a framework and we're kind of at an edge case, and we're getting a weird era where there's something we can't figure out, and we're Googling and trolling Stackoverflow and just looking at it, and we finally find this one instance of that, and there was no response, and there was nothing else that ever came of it. You're just so frustrated with that whole experience. Ionic currently helps to avoid this because, frankly, there is so much documentation out there. It's a massive community. There are 6 or 7 really prominent developers that cater to exclusively Ionic for tutorials, for troubleshooting, and also integrating some of these more edge Cordova plugins. So, why would I choose Ionic? Let's go ahead and kind of break down an overview of what Ionic is, and then we'll get into some live code samples. So, one thing that's unique about Ionic is it uses Angular. One of the most common questions I see is, hey, I want to use Ionic, but I don't know Angular. Ionic makes it pretty easy to, if you're not familiar to Angular, you can kind of learn as you go. Now, I think it's recommended to do a bit of a dive into Angular before you get too deep into Ionic. But you can certainly learn it as you're going. So I wouldn't say that Angular is a prerequisite to starting. Another thing Ionic does that's really cool is a lot of these unique UI elements are wrapped up and they're created as directives. So those of you familiar with Angular and Angular directives know that it's kind of already wrapped up and contained for you. So you can just grab that unique element, like a list element for newsfeed or something, pop it in, and just it'll ng repeat. So it's going to list out all of those different items in the newsfeed. Like all hybrid apps, you're basically developing with front-end code, right? You're using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, once you really dive in, you may encounter issues where, and I've had to do this as we've continued to build out our app and see some weird stuff happening in production, actually write some Objective-C, write some Java to get these plugins working. Because sometimes you'll find a plugin that's not actually working correctly. That's not necessarily a reflection of Ionic as a platform. That's a broader statement about the community as a whole and what it takes to expose to these native features. Going back to documentation and just what's out there for Ionic, one of the real pros is documentation. It's so developer friendly. You can get an overview and a crash course with real live examples, as well as what I described earlier is you've got this feed of CSS components and JavaScript, and then on the right-hand side, as you go through and scroll through this documentation, you can see a phone with an HTML embed, and you can actually see what these different elements and CSS styles look like in real time. Some of the other things too, Ionic has its own set of icons called icons, but they were also developed in a way so that you've got UX and interface components that fit the platform, right? So when I deploy to iOS and Android, I can have elements in there that are going to be unique to each platform, and it's going to match exactly as the most up-to-date, common Android UI looks like, as well as iOS. The other thing too is the command line. Even if you come from a background where you haven't done a lot of work from the command line, it's so easy to get started. Ionic has its own command line, the generator, so you can scaffold out apps in a quick way. You'll see just how quick that can happen here in a second. Let's talk about trends. Earlier I alluded to what's happening in a broader sense. These are just some Google trends. And I've created a search where it filters by a topic, and it's technology and computers is the topic, right? So this isn't like Ionic bonding if you come from a chemistry background. This is Ionic in terms of like computer frameworks, React Native, and PhoneGap. And as you can see here, it's just kind of what you would expect intuitively. Over the last 18 months, PhoneGap has been Googled in a decreasing amount, whereas Ionic has eclipsed that, and we can see down here too that React Native is on the rise. So there's been a lot of excitement around that as of late, but it's still not nearly as popular as Ionic. Let's talk about the community. Anytime you're picking something to adopt, you want to look at the community and say, how many people have started on GitHub? How many people are actively using this? Is this framework being updated on a regular basis? Then also looking at commit history and pull requests and just seeing how active the community is. Ionic is extremely active. The whole community is friendly too. And I've been in some communities that are less than friendly before. So I'm happy to be a part of this community. The user base is increasingly large, and the forums that they've already got out there on ionicforums.com are really well organized by different topics, whether it's somebody who's looking for a tutorial, or whether you're finding a weird bug or need help with something. You can find a really nice thread and go through there. Typically, you can get a relatively quick response. And the other cool thing is that the people that actually run Ionic are mostly developers. So you'll actually see these guys in there answering questions, helping you get things figured out. A while back, last month, there was this issue where the Ionic keyboard was being rejected. Any app that had the Ionic keyboard was being rejected in iOS when it was sent to review. And I was really impressed with Ionic, the team there. They basically totally overhauled a lot of the code, made a quick fix, and then alerted everybody with the blog post to say, hey, like before you go deploy next time, make sure that you update this here. Which is really cool to see an organization that is that on top of it. The first time a user reported it, they were already on it, trying to figure out why it was rejected. And when you're looking at a framework, it's really important to look out there and say that, hey, I've got this whole organization that's backing, and they're actively investing in making sure the user experience and developer experience is as good as possible. It's also worth pointing out too, they've got a lot of shared code examples, and people are willing to share their Git repos too. So if you're looking at a basic to-do list app or any kind of simple app that you typically see in some of these communities, you can jump in a forum and ask, and somebody will share it and say, hey, check out this repo, download it, and check it out. As I mentioned earlier, the UX and design is a real strength behind Ionic. It's consistent, and that's something that React and some of the other frameworks don't have. Now, if you're looking for something that's less opinionated, it may not be right for you because a lot of these components are hard-coded into the core Ionic platform. Now, you can, of course, override them in your CSS and styles, and you can change the markup. But I found that the UX patterns they're using, best of breed. I mean, it's the best, the most universally accepted patterns. They also mentioned the native iOS and Android components in UI as well, and they're organized by Angular directives. Now, earlier I was describing how there's this, in the documentation, there's this excellent section where you can go through and just scroll down a list of components. And on the right-hand side, it's going to update what those components will look like inside of the web view. So as you can see here, it's scrolling down through these button components. And you can see that this particular button and this particular button class are going to render in that way. Now, there are more complex examples to it as we go down and look at some of the different icons and things like that. So here you've got the list view, you've got some of these list icons. So all of the CSS components that are actually built into the core Ionic platform are, you can demo them here. So it's great if you haven't checked out this section of the Ionic website, I highly recommend it. It's just in their developer docs, and it's kind of the main section there. Now, one of the really cool things about Ionic, you see, Ionic started as just a plain vanilla framework. And it picked up where Phone got left off, did some things better, and used Angular. And now the direction they're heading is a really streamlined, seamless development experience for mobile. There are a lot of services out there when it comes to backend as a service. I know a lot of people have dealt with those headaches. Some people use Facebook's parse. And unfortunately, they said, hey, we're getting rid of this. And then a lot of people were scrambling, looking for open source alternatives. What Ionic's really doing here is they're wrapping all of that into one package. User management, push notifications, authentication, and then a whole other suite of products for deploying and packaging up those binaries. So eventually what this is going to do is it's going to cut out the real big pain point, which is compiling, deploying, testing on native, all that good stuff. So we'll get into the platform in a little bit, but it's just important to know that's a real positive for Ionic, is they've got this very vast and rich ecosystem of capabilities. In addition to the front-end framework, there's a whole suite of back-end services. Now, the biggest con, and really the only negative that I see with the framework, it's not necessarily a problem with the framework itself. It's a problem with how Cordova works and how this UI web view works. If you're building a simple to-do app, you will never, ever notice a difference in performance because it's not going to have any animations or graphically intensive processes. The performance hit will be most noticeable when you are painting or doing some kind of a graphically intensive animation. Cordova and Ionic as a whole have come a really long way in 2 years to improve this. There's a whole package for Android that actually helps because Android has some of the biggest issues with laggy things and things like that. But I think the big picture is what I mentioned earlier, where we've got the web, and everybody's investing money in building platforms on the web. The web is going to continue to improve, and mobile platforms are improving at an exponential rate, right? I mean, you've got the computing power in this phone, the fastest PC in 2007, 2008 would have, right? I mean, it's really, really a lot of power right there at fingertips. I saw a article last week where somebody had ported an older version of Windows to the Apple Watch, which is just mind-blowing. So in that context and thinking in that direction, I don't know that the web view is as much of a problem today unless you are building a game or you're building something that needs a lot of native functionality. Because as the app gets heavier too, you can notice some of those performance hits. I've noticed a little bit and have had to spend a good deal of time as I've added 10 or 11 different Cordova plugins, and a lot of these have some integrations with animations. That's really where I've noticed performance hits. It's not to say you can't work around it. I've found ways, but it can be a bit of a pain point in the development process. That's something that's going to happen anytime you're using a UI web view with the current hardware and operating systems. All right, so the fun part, let's build something. Okay. Show of hands, anybody built anything with Ionic before? Okay, we got a couple. So this will probably seem familiar for those of you, for others of you. It's really, really quick. The first thing, you need Node. So if you don't have Node installed, you need to download it and just install it, because we use, we're going to use npm to install Cordova and the Ionic command line tool. So the first thing you run is use npm to install both of these globally. You want to globally install Cordova, you want to globally install Ionic. Next up, this is just a little sample app I created. Now the syntax here is kind of interesting. So Ionic, you're just calling that command line tool start. You're starting the build process. The syntax con, or whatever goes in this third spot, is going to be the name of it, right? So we could have called it anything. The last thing, Ionic by default has a couple of these starter templates. Tabs is a pretty cool one. Tabs is going to be your bottom menu, right? Like menu tab, UI pattern. There's also a sidebar menu pattern. Then there's a blank starter template as well, if you don't need anything to start out. So let's go ahead and get that running. So right now it's actually just downloading the package and everything. It's going to continue installing. And once it does, we're actually going to just go to that directory, and I'm going to show you how we can navigate through it and see what's being installed. So while that's going, let's jump down here and talk about what's going to happen next. So it's going to download to a folder on my desktop. That was just my current directory. Then I'm going to change directories and go into that syntax con folder, right? That's going to be where all of my Ionic code is now living. One thing to note, Ionic command line tool lets you add different platforms. So here I could say, let's add Ionic platform, add iOS. That's going to add iOS and the necessary dependencies to go ahead and deploy right to iOS. Or not deploy, but to run an iOS build. If you wanted to add Android, it would be very similar. Ionic platform, add Android. I don't build for Windows, but I imagine it would be similar. Ionic platform, add Windows. But yeah, for now, I'm only focused on Ionic and or iOS and Android. Let's check back over and see how that's looking. Okay, so it looks like it's gone through, it's scaffolded out my project. It's asking me now if I want to create an Ionic account to send push notifications. So this is what I was talking about earlier with the Ionic platform and all the different functionalities that are out there for that. You can use push, you can use the user management system, and a number of other services. I'm going to say no, I've already got an account. But yeah, you could set one up here if you want. All right. So let's see into syntax con, and let's see what we got here. You'll notice this is using a lot of the current build tools you're probably familiar with. By default, it's going to use Gulp for task running and task management, Bower for managing your dependencies. Config.xml is a file that's going to be used for your build process. So when you go to compile and ready your builds for native deployment, that's what's going to be there. And then you've also got this www folder. I'm just going to CD in here while we're at it. It's going to break it down to a root directory with an index file. That index file is going to be very similar to a web project you've used before, where you've got your index and then you're including all your dependencies there. And then you've got a library file that's going to have your, or library folder that's going to have your dependencies. The template folder is going to have all of your HTML markup. And yeah, that's a good overview. But let's go ahead and let's put this in. So I'm going to go back up to my root directory, and let's add the platform. Now I think I've got a build task that's already adding that automatically, but just in case it's not there, platform add iOS. So it's going to actually download and build that. And I'm going to get an error because I did already have that added. But if you didn't have a build process that was automatically adding that in, it would have added here, no problem. So next up, let's go ahead and compile this, right? You have to run a build process to actually build it and ready it for an iOS device. Our end goal here, we want to emulate it, we want to see what this thing looks like. So let's go ahead and build it out. So again, back here it's just going to be Ionic build iOS, and after that, after the build process is finished, we can emulate it, and we're going to run it in our emulator. That's really small. Let's let me increase the size of that too. All right, so the build is finished. Now what this is going to do, and you really have to have Xcode installed, it's going to use my iPhone emulator. If you don't have Xcode installed, you're going to have to install it, and most of the time you're going to need to pay for a license. Now that's getting into the pains of deployment and development. It's $99 a year for a dev license, so you're not breaking the bank, but it's just one of these annoying things that you got to do. I think you can download a little purchase of Xcode without the license, so that might be an option as well. So here we've got the emulator running. It's kind of large size here. But as you can see, it's generated my tab layout where I can click through. As you're looking at it, you can see that it's got these different embedded views. And this was nothing I wrote or anything. I mean, this is just the starter template. You can imagine a lot of use cases for something like this. Simple messaging app, scheduling app, a number of use cases. And the neat thing here is they've got this tab interface, and it's already set up to use the tab layout. And an account management setting as well. So for those with iPhones or familiar with the iPhone UI, it looks really, really similar to what you look at in any other iPhone application. It does not look like a web app that's embedded, right? And it's not going to when you deploy it to the phone. It's going to look just like any other app. And that's what I really love about Ionic is you can build something, and you can build something quickly and have it render in a way that's almost indistinguishable from any other native app. The only drawback is going to be if you're doing something performance intensive, like animating something or even having some kind of sophisticated animation or graphically intensive process. So let's go to the emulator. That was just 3-4 commands to get started on Ionic. It's so easy. Obviously, there is a lot more to it than that, but I think the best way to learn Ionic is to just jump in, download it, and play around. Get started by tweaking the code yourself and just learning it that way. That's how I started it, and you can learn it really quickly, particularly if you come from an Angular background. And even if you don't, you can pick up a lot of Angular just from working with the framework. Back to like how this all works, right? I was building it, I was emulating it. What happens when I build it? Well, when you're building it, it's actually linking up Ionic to the native Cordova functionality. So it's taking my web files that the JavaScript dependencies, the CSS, my HTML, the different libraries I'm using, and it's actually setting that up to run for iOS. And there are a number of platforms, a number of plugins you can install, and the different plugins are going to be integrated with it at that time. If I try to run the Ionic app in the browser, which you can do just from the command line, Ionic start, it's going to launch it in a browser window. Here's the thing, though, it's really easy to debug like that. The problem is going to be that in order to test the native functionality of these Cordova plugins, it has to be on an emulator or it has to be on a fan. So you're going to get all kinds of errors in your console saying, hey, this microphone plugin or this media plugin is missing. I can't run this media file. And that's because it is native functionality, and it's looking for this global variable that doesn't exist in the browser. There's a really, really cool wrapper for Cordova. It's called NG Cordova. Now, there are a lot of changes that are coming soon using TypeScript and redoing a lot of what NG Cordova has been doing. I think it's going to be a good change, but for now, NG Cordova is still live and being developed. I use a lot of NG Cordova features in my build process because it is really, really easy to just hook in to this Angular wrapper, bring it into my app, and suddenly you've got this native functionality. There are I think there's like 50 or 60 plugins out there, maybe more by now. But really anything you want to do with your phone, there's a plugin for it. And it's most likely actively developed, and you're going to be able to do all sorts of things. You've got the camera as the most basic. Touch ID is a new one. OAuth, progress indicators, geolocation, so if you want to do a geofencing app, Yik Yak clone or something like that, you can use the geolocation plugin. And then there are a number of push notification Cordova plugins out there as well. So now let's talk about getting to production. This is the part where things get to be challenging. So far, we've built our app out. We've used a lot of our existing knowledge and skill sets to get our templates and HTML down. We've got a lot of interactivity with our JavaScript and Angular. We've got it styled nicely with our CSS. We're ready to deploy it and actually get it to the app stores. We've done some testing locally. Our emulator looks good. And now it's time to launch. What are we going to do next? Well, let's talk about iOS first, because that's the bad news. iOS is really, really long, arduous, and more difficult than it should be. Apple is kind of this walled garden around the iOS deployment process and the approval process. They get thousands and thousands of requests for app submissions daily. So you can imagine that this small team, they're in Cupertino. We actually have I've written a listener on our server, so anytime an IP address and this range in the Cupertino area hits my server, I know that they're reviewing an app. So it's kind of cool that they are actually at Apple, and it's a real team of real people that are going to be looking at your app, and they want to make sure it doesn't crash. If it crashes, it's rejected. If it doesn't adhere to all of Apple's deployment guidelines, it's rejected. If it's not new or a novel app, if it's similar to something that's existing, it'll be rejected. There are a lot of ways your app can be rejected. Sometimes I feel like they just reject it because it's the first time you've ever deployed. We ran into this initially, and there were some really, really minimal things that caused the app to be rejected. And then after we were accepted, never got rejected again. I'm not going to go into too much depth. I could spend 6 or 7 hours in this room with everyone here, walking through every little step that has to happen to get into the app store. And even then, you're probably going to have to resubmit because they're probably going to reject it. First things first, you pay $99 to get that Apple Dev license. You're also going to need to download Xcode, which is a massive 8 gigabyte or maybe larger application. You have to have a Mac to do that as well, right? If you've got a Windows machine, you can't run Xcode. So that's a pretty big barrier right there. You also have to create a provisioning profile. This lets you sign the binary. Apple wants to make sure that a certified Apple developer is actually signing off on these binaries so that if there was something wrong with it or some issue with it, you are certifying that, hey, this is my work product. So once you go through the trouble of creating that provisioning profile, you want to double check or triple check this long list of the Apple development guidelines. There are a ton, and anything from the Apple Human Interface Guidelines are really hard to look at because they will reject it for an icon that's used improperly. They really want to focus on quality control. And for those of you that have iPhones, you're probably wondering, how did so many of these apps get the App Store to look absolutely awful? I have no idea, and this is something that I often wonder. how did these other apps ever get approved? Because they look like garbage. I think it's been a more recent phenomenon and something that Apple has really cracked down on this, realizing that they've got to really enforce quality control to maintain quality apps. So going forward, it's going to be even harder. You want to really look at those guidelines, make sure you're crossing every T and dotting every I. Once you've reviewed it, you're sure that you're in compliance, you're going to basically create this app ID and store listing. This is going to be the store listing that you've got out there that everybody sees with your pretty little icon and everything like that. You'll get this app ID, and then you're going to open up Xcode, compile that binary, and upload it. It's going to upload, and then you're just going to click Submit to Apple. And Apple's going to review it, and it's going to take a while. There's a great site out here. It's Apple Review Times, and I highly recommend it. If you've never deployed to Apple before, right now it's super fast because we're a long ways from a developer conference. But in June, after WWDC, it's going to be probably 12 or 13 days. Before the holidays, I think it was closer to 20 days. So imagine that. Your app, you submit this app, it gets reviewed, it gets rejected after 20 days of waiting. You got to start the whole thing over again at the back of the line. So if you're thinking about deploying some
for updates to you or just new deployments?
That's a good question. So for those on the web that may not have heard, he is asking about the time difference between updates and initial deployments. There isn't a good distinction between the two, and this is something that I wish Apple would provide more documentation on. This site that you're seeing now, this is entirely user source. So I contributed to this, other developers contributed to this. Basically, you tweet this and hashtag it. You hashtag Apple Review Times after your app is accepted or rejected, whatever happens. So we're totally crowdsourcing this idea of how long it takes. Now, some people will say, hey, like my app update took this long, so you can get on Twitter and look out there. Typically, I've seen that it's 2 to 3 days faster if it's just an update. For me, it was taking 7 days consistently to get a new version looked at and approved. Updates take usually 3 to 5 days, and right now, clearly, it seems to be faster. You can even click in and see what people are saying about the different review times and when things are coming in. So I need to get an update out if it's that fast. Yeah, so back to our presentation here. You most likely will need to resubmit. I mean, it's just the reality of it. Most people I talk to have gone through it. There's been a minor thing that they've missed. Any app with any kind of complexity, it's probably going to get some reason for being rejected. For us, it was user source content. If you have any user source content, you absolutely have to have a flagging system or a content moderation system. So even though you don't have any profane content, you don't plan on having any profane or graphic nudity or anything, a user could theoretically upload a profile picture that's indecent. So Apple's going to reject that if you don't have a means of moderating content. So just good stuff to keep in mind. So you'll submit it. You'll either be accepted or rejected. You've got to fix the issues if you're rejected. Resubmit it. Just rinse and repeat until you get it in. I think the biggest thing is being persistent. Eventually you'll get in. I had to make a lot of calls to Apple development, including people on the phone. Just please tell me what I need to do to get this right. I'm a smart guy. I can figure it out. Just tell me. And the next time they approve it. I don't know if those events are related, but there is a human component. They try to be walled off. Just keep that in mind. Google Play Store isn't that bad. Now, you're going to have to download all the, you have to download Java. If you're a Mac person, you're probably not crazy about that. But once you download all the dependencies and the Android SDK, it's not bad at all. In fact, Ionic has got some really, really great resources for step-by-step command line instructions, exactly what you need to do to get everything prepared and deployed. I just got lazy and copied the screenshot here. This is on the Ionic website. If you go down and look at Android deployment, really easy. You build, release, you compile the APK. You have to use a key tool to sign. You can read more about that on the Ionic side and why that's needed. But then once the APK is signed, it's good to upload. You can upload to the Google Store, and the phenomenal thing about the Google Play Store, they are fast. I don't know if it's a machine that scans these things. It can be human because it's usually 6 to 8 hours before you're in the store. You can use production apps, beta apps, alpha apps. They have a lot of different distinctions you can use. If it's a beta or alpha app, it's really, really quick. You can get it in there really, really quickly. The production app, it may be a little longer, but again, I don't think it's any more than 24 hours, maybe 48 hours max. And they're not nearly as strict either. So it may be worth just checking out Android first if it's your first crack at production app. That said, more people in the US have iOS, so if you're looking for mass market deal, you want to go for that before and just get started and assume, knowing that it's going to be a long process. Let's go back to the Ionic ecosystem. We talked about building and just the framework as a whole and how all that fits together. There's some really exciting things coming down the pipeline. There have been a number of these services and features in beta for the last year. I used Push at the very beginning, and it's a push service, kind of like Urban Airship or a number of these others you've probably seen out there. At first, it wasn't great, but they've come a long way. They're investing a lot of development and engineering resources in making this a phenomenal ecosystem. I've got a lot of faith in the Ionic team to continue to build this out and build high-quality products. One thing, as I just mentioned, Ionic Push. This is something that, if we were looking at my command line here when it initially told me to, or asked if I wanted to go ahead and register for that Ionic service. We won't scroll up through all that, but when I initially set it up, it said, hey, do you want to register for Ionic.io? If I had registered there, then I could go ahead and I'd get a key and I could use Ionic Push right in my app. If you're using Ionic for prototyping, which I think is a great use case, if you're just trying to test your app, see if there's any market potential, do this. Definitely do this. It's going to save you a bit of time. It's already integrated. It's all in platform. There's a really pretty dashboard that they have built right into the Ionic web dashboard. You can actually see all the choosing D3 or something to animate charts and logins and things of that nature. Ionic View is also a really cool feature. Remember earlier I was speaking to how you've got this ability to test and demo non-native functionality. What Ionic View does is it allows you to get other stakeholders, if you've got a client or somebody you're looking for, and they want to see what this app looks like, how do I click through it. You can use Ionic View to do that. I think now they actually support the camera too, if I recall correctly. But you can get some of these somewhat native functionalities, I think. Yeah, it's really easy though. People just would install this Ionic View app. They would add your code. You get a code specific to the device. As you can see here, the ID. You just got that ID, and it'll download the Ionic View of this individual app. So it's really, really great for a client that wants to make sure you're working hard at building the app that they want. It's also great if you're just prototyping and wanting to get other people's opinions and actually test it on the device. The other nice thing is you don't need a provision profile. That's the big thing with Ionic. It's a pain or with iOS, sorry. With iOS, it's a pain is you have to have this developer key and provision profile and actually see it on a mobile device. This lets you see it on a mobile device without that key. This is brand new. It's called the Ionic Playground. It reminds me a little bit of OpenPen or like JSFiddle or JSBin. It's a little cleaner and it's more Ionic centric, so it's going to use some of those built-in dependencies and whatnot. It really is just kind of an embed that lets you see what the app would look like on a device. So it's great in that regard. I don't know what the feature is with this, but I think it's just a cool little tool to quickly mock up different interfaces. It's certainly worth keeping in mind. And Ionic Creator, this is something that's really interesting for people that may not even have a coding background. It's really, really new. I tried it last fall, and it was in like alpha testing. It wasn't very good at all. But it's come a long way. Now you can actually drag and drop these different UI elements onto the wireframe, and it's going to generate code based on that. So you can scout. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty impressive. You can actually mock up your different interface elements. You can get it all connected. You can even connect your login screen to another screen, a landing page screen, and it will generate all that code for you. There are a couple of other features that Ionic Creator allows to, and I think this is going to be a main feature. So it's worth keeping in mind that some of these services are going to be how Ionic makes money. The framework as a whole is going to stay open source, but these guys, if they want to build something really quality, they're going to have to pay themselves somehow, and this is how they're doing it with a lot of these premium backend services. Recently, the hype has been around Ionic 2, and there's a lot of promise for Ionic 2. I haven't built with it yet. I look forward to testing it out, and everything I've heard has been very positive. The animation issues I mentioned earlier, those are less apparent due to some little fixes and tweaks they've made to the framework and the platform. Another thing that's a lot more performant is Angular 2. Ionic 2 uses Angular 2. Angular 2 has a lot of really great performance improvements. And another thing, you always want to see the company that's behind it. And they just raised $8.5 million in Series A funding. So Ionic isn't going away anytime soon. It's well funded. It's got a team of really dedicated developers and stakeholders behind it. So they've got a lot of cash in the bank to continue development, continue building things out. And I definitely see the future of Ionic as a framework to be very positive. And that is all I have in terms of presentation. I've got about 5 minutes to answer questions. If anybody has any particular questions about Ionic, Angular platform as a whole, the ecosystem. Cool. Well, thanks everyone.